This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. Today we're saluting our veterans, and on another level, all the people in Georgia who won't get an end to election season until January. President Trump's refusal to concede could have an impact on the military intelligence and national security. Plus, in such an uncomfortable year, we'll hear from a few experts to explain the psychology behind comfort TV. But first, here's what you need to know right now. There's growing drama surrounding the vote count in Georgia as the state takes the political spotlight. Today, its Secretary of State announced Georgia will recount every ballot by hand. Even though Georgia alone would not swing an election win to Trump, the state's vote count has become hotly contested as President Donald Trump continues to closely trail President-elect Joe Biden.
This will help build confidence. It will be an audit, a recount, and a recanvass all at once. It will be a heavy lift, but we will work with the counties to get this done in time for our state certification.
To up the ante even more, the two sitting U.S. senators from Georgia have called for the Secretary of State to resign. In a joint statement, they said, "We believe when there are failures, they need to be called out, even when it's in your own party. There have been too many failures in Georgia elections this year." Now, there's still no proof of widespread fraud or mismanagement in Georgia's election. The Secretary of State who's managing the election is also a Republican and has tried to maintain transparency. But Georgia is a prime example of a state where Democratic gains have the state's conservative leadership jumping to find fraud. Georgia will likely stay at the center of attention for a while. In January, two runoff races could determine whether or not the Democrats will win control of the U.S. Senate. Election results and lawsuits have been dominating the headlines, but the coronavirus pandemic is still very much happening. In fact, health experts and epidemiologists say the worst is yet to come.
All of the signs, all of the data, all of the anecdotal experience all points to a very grim winter.
Today, Texas became the first state to surpass 1 million total cases. In El Paso, at least 10 mobile morgues were called in to help with rising death counts. Meanwhile, hospitals in North Dakota are at 100% capacity. To help deal with the patients and shortage of healthcare workers, the governor is allowing healthcare workers with asymptomatic cases of COVID to continue working. And look, we aren't trying to scare anybody, but with Thanksgiving approaching, it's important to point out just how prevalent the virus still is. And even with the excitement over a promising vaccine candidate this week, Dr. Anthony Fauci says that doesn't mean you stop the personal protections.
The fact that people realize that help is on the way in the form of a vaccine, and soon, that would get them to be even more motivated to do the public health measures, because when you know help is on the way, don't give up.
Today is Veterans Day, and first off, we wanted to take a moment to say thank you to all the people who have served in the armed forces. Today, the president and president-elect both paid their respects to military members as well. President Trump went to the Arlington National Cemetery to lay a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. It was his first public appearance since the election was called for Joe Biden 6 days ago. President-elect Biden visited the Korean War Memorial in Philadelphia to pay his respects. While President-elect Joe Biden has begun building his administration, President Trump has refused to concede while he and his supporters claim rampant voter fraud without any real evidence. There's no consistent timeline when it comes to transitioning from one administration to another, but as Newsy's Sasha Ingber reports, a handoff delay could impact national intelligence and national security.
National security experts say that in 2000, a delayed transition for George W. Bush affected the 9/11 response.
If you look back at the 9/11 Commission report, they found that the Bush administration was not well prepared, and they blamed a shortened transition for that.
These same people now say Joe Biden could be playing catch-up the day he becomes president on January 20th, because President Trump is denying him intelligence in the transition.
There's no logical reason to be doing this.
It's a tradition and courtesy the president is upending as he refuses to concede the election.
Access to classified information is useful, but I'm not in a position to make any decisions on those issues anyway. It would be nice to have it, but it's not critical.
But every day that goes by matters.
Every delay decreases the amount of time they have to deal with everything that's going on in the world.
I would become overly worried if we get to Thanksgiving or after, and without any logical path to victory, Trump and the administration continue to deny an avenue into things like intelligence and the president's daily brief.
A spokesperson with the Office of the Director of National Intelligence tells Newsy they won't contact the transition team until notified by the General Services Administration, an agency led by a Trump political appointee. The country's top diplomat had his own response.
There will be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration. All right, we're ready.
A member of the Trump administration who resigned in April says the task ahead for the president-elect is daunting.
There's going to just be a backlog of policy decisions that should have been addressed in the last few years that didn't get addressed. And I think, sadly, that the Biden administration is probably going to be a little surprised at the workload that they have to deal with in the next few years.
Security experts are also asking whether President Trump is a security risk amid the transition.
Clearly, we haven't had anybody with hundreds of millions of dollars in debt walking freely with the classified information in their head that this president has, and a president who may leave office with a grudge against the government.
They say Biden's national security officials may need to consider the possibility that a foreign leader could offer to alleviate the president's debt. But first, there's about 70 days remaining, and the president can declassify any secrets.
What's more dangerous, clearly the situation now is, because the president of the United States can get any information he wants from the U.S. government at any moment. All he has to do is request it, and it will be provided to him. That's different in January 20th and onward, because then he has to rely on what he remembers.
The White House didn't respond to Newsy's request for comment on the transition, but calls for intelligence sharing have become bipartisan. In Washington, Sasha Ingber, Newsy.
When you're back, we'll take you through what's trending, as long as you don't ask me about my weekly screen time report.
We take a step away from the noise and spin to really hear the stories that need to be told. Newsy cuts through.
This is the part of the show where I get paid to talk about Twitter, so let's get this money. If you haven't taken a look at a COVID case chart in a while, let me spare you the trouble. It don't look good, and infections have also struck a number of college football programs. This week, 4 different SEC football games were postponed due to positive cases, contact tracing, and quarantines. That's Georgia, Missouri, Alabama, LSU, Texas A&M and Tennessee, and Auburn, Mississippi State. On Tuesday, before the 4th SEC game was postponed, the league commissioner said, "We began this season with the understanding that interruptions to the schedule were possible, and we have remained focused throughout the season on the health of everyone around our programs." What's yet to be seen, though, is exactly how this season will finish up. More than 50 FBS games have been postponed or canceled this season because of COVID-19. And we're still more than a month away from the scheduled college football playoff semifinals and championship game. Look ma, no hands. Japanese car maker Honda is going hands-free after announcing they're rolling out a level 3 automated driving system for their new Honda Legend in Japan, which is mechanically similar to the Acura RLX sold in the US. Level 3 means the car can drive itself in certain conditions, but the driver has to be ready to take the helm. Nearly every autonomous car we've seen on the road, including Teslas, are level 2s. Honda claims it'll be the first to mass produce level 3 autonomous cars and put them on the road. Truly, we are inching ever closer to those automated death baskets from Minority Report. Honda said they'll launch sales of their new Legends by the end of March 2021. And Lucille Bridges, the mother of civil rights activist Ruby Bridges, passed away at the age of 86. In 1960, when Ruby became the first black student to integrate her all-white New Orleans elementary school, Lucille was by her side along with U.S. Marshals while crowds shouted and threw things at a 6-year-old girl. And the harassment continued once Ruby left school.
So many people got in the car and just followed us. And when they followed us home, they started pitching bottles and things. What they did is just call in United States Marshals, and that's the way we lived it for a whole year.
Ruby was immortalized in the Norman Rockwell painting The Problem We Live With, but she has insisted that her mother and father were the real heroes. On Instagram, Ruby remembered her mother calling her a brave, progressive champion for change. She helped alter the course of so many lives by setting me on my path as a 6-year-old little girl. If you're like me, the general election has dominated your life and your viewing habits. So much so that I could probably draw you a fairly up-to-date electoral college map from memory, and I don't want that. But many of us have turned to comfort television when we weren't following the incremental election updates. Newsy's Casey Mendoza spoke to a few experts to explain the psychology behind that.
The race continues to tighten.
The states will all need to officially certify the vote.
Yeah, well, it was.
If your eyes were glued to a screen during election week, you're one of millions. News outlets all over the country saw major boosts in viewership. But when viewers weren't keeping up with the news, several were turning into comforting favorites like Schitt's Creek, Parks and Recreation, and The Office.
There appears to be this kind of like push-pull between wanting to alleviate stress sometimes and wanting to keep informed.
We kind of tend to lean into certain TV shows as for an escape from the stress of what's going on in the world.
Sitcoms in general tend to be my feel-good.
Downton Abbey, obviously. I'm there on the screen right now.
Certain types of shows are better at comforting viewers during high-stress times, and Maryville University counselor Jennifer Henry split them up into 3 categories: uplifting feel-good shows, nostalgic favorites, and dystopian dramas. Let's start with the first category.
Examples of that could be like the Great British Baking Show. My close friend described that to me as watching a warm hug.
Familiar, comforting, lovely.
Uplifting feel-good shows have seen huge rises in demand since the start of the pandemic. Other popular titles in the category include Schitt's Creek and Parks and Recreation, both sitcoms about friendship and community.
2024. I win, we move in there.
The second category, nostalgic favorites, are typically just as uplifting, but more importantly for viewers, they're familiar.
Here's to good friends.
Cheers. Cheers.
The Office is one of the best examples of a nostalgic favorite. Even though it ended in 2013, fans continue to tune in, and the sitcom was consistently one of Netflix's top titles in the US during election week.
There's a high level of comfort that comes from the certainty of knowing how it's going to end. It's a low emotional investment. You're not on the edge of your seat because you know the outcome.
It's really about what brings familiarity and comfort for people. That tends to be the critical components for things to alleviate stress.
That brings us to the last category, dystopian dramas, which can feel familiar, just not in a way that's uplifting.
It's mutated.
Which way, better or worse?
Titles like Contagion, a 2011 film about a pandemic, or Black Mirror, which draws on the fears of technology, are popular because of their relevance. They're not comforting in the traditional sense, but experts say they can provide a different sort of escape or coping strategy for stress.
Part of this, I believe, is kind of the idea that you're seeing someone else struggling, if you're struggling, as well as the idea that, well, it could be a lot worse, and so that can be a comfort as well.
Casey Mendoza, Newsy, Chicago.
I know what you're thinking, and yes, In the Loop can also be comfort television. You're welcome. If you've been rocking with us this week, we've kept you up to speed on how world leaders have reacted to a president-elect Biden. A few world leaders have been silent, while others from the UK, Germany, India, and Israel, to name a few, have seemingly moved on, offering their personal congratulations to Biden and Kamala Harris. Newsy's Ben Shamiso tells us how Biden is already fielding invitations from world leaders to attend conferences.
As the Trump administration doubles down on its refusal to concede the election,
it will be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration.
America's allies are wasting no time preparing for an incoming Biden presidency.
I wanted really to congratulate you.
After the vast majority of world leaders sent the president-elect congratulatory messages, some are now calling him to discuss shared goals and challenges. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau kicked off the diplomatic calls and was followed by the leaders of Germany, Ireland, the United Kingdom, and France. In each call, Biden and his counterparts vowed to collaborate on fighting the pandemic and climate change, issues the Trump administration has largely downplayed. French President Emmanuel Macron spoke with Biden about fighting terrorism and defending human rights. German Chancellor Angela Merkel discussed deepening transatlantic ties through NATO and the EU. And Prime Minister Boris Johnson invited Biden to attend international summits in the UK next year.
I look forward very much to working with President Biden and his team, tackling climate change, trade, international security.
In other years, these conversations would have been seen as formalities. But as President Trump and his allies hang to their claims of voter fraud and even victory, the phone calls prove that most of the world is ready to move on. Still, the president isn't completely isolated on the world stage. The leaders of Mexico, Russia, and China say they are waiting for the end of legal challenges to recognize an election winner. Ben Chamisso, Newsy.
Back to the election itself, national reporter Usher Qureshi tells us what's next when it comes to recounts and actually certifying the winner of the presidential election.
6 feet behind.
With races too close to call in Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia, Pennsylvania became the battleground that tipped the Electoral College count in Biden's favor Saturday afternoon. But within hours of declaring victory, adding Georgia and Nevada to the blue column, President Donald Trump released a statement saying, quote, Joe Biden has not been certified the winner of any state.
Sure, technically it's true. Certifying election results takes a while.
Kira Lerner is the managing editor of VoteBeat, a nonpartisan nonprofit covering election administration and voting.
Canvassing is the process of counting the ballots. It's what election officials are doing across the country right now. They're working tirelessly overnight in some cases to make sure that every single vote is counted. And then the certification process, each state has a different deadline.
Certification happens after canvassing, whereby election officials verify that every single ballot was counted and there were no clerical errors. But tallying has taken longer due to record turnout and a surge in mail-in ballots. Still, 6 states have a deadline of within 1 week of the election to certify their results. In 26 states and Washington, D.C., the certification deadline is between November 10th and the 30th. In 14 states, the certification deadline is in December. The remaining states don't have deadlines.
It will be some time before we can formally certify the winner of the presidential contest, but that doesn't mean that we won't know without a doubt who our president-elect is, which we already do.
And then there are the recounts. In some states, they are automatically triggered when the victory falls within a razor-thin margin. In Georgia, for example, that's half of 1%. But in the majority of states, candidates, political parties, and in some cases, voters can request a recount. Currently, the Trump administration is calling for recounts in Wisconsin and Georgia.
In Wisconsin, you have 2 days after the winner of the race has been certified to call for a recount. In other states like Georgia, the Secretary of State has already said that he will be seeking a recount on Donald Trump's behalf.
Lerner says legal challenges and recounts will likely fail to change the outcome of the election. Electors will vote by mid-December and deliver to officials in Washington just before Christmas. It may take a few more weeks, but the official results, say experts, are unlikely to be delayed. I'm Usher Qureshi reporting.
If you haven't done so already, feel free to reach out to us on Twitter using the hashtag #NewsyInTheLoop. It's the only good and safe way to talk to me, not only because of the coronavirus, but also because I'm still relearning how to have a normal conversation. I've been in here by myself for the last 6 months, folks. What did you expect? In a year full of unexpected twists and turns, there have been some constants, like rent coming due on the 1st of every month. And in a year when we've seen record unemployment, coming up with that rent has been tough for some people. The U.S. is under an eviction moratorium that prevents landlords from evicting tenants until the end of this year. But an estimated 10 million people won't be able to make rent through next summer. National reporter Dan Grossman tells us there are programs willing to help, but the assistance you get depends on where you live.
Imagine our country's issue with rent relief as a building. It has layers, each one complex and different, yet interconnected with the stability of the next resting on its shoulders.
It's kind of a, borrowing from one pocket to pay the other situation.
As a principal researcher with the Urban Institute, Martha Gomez has made it her mission to study those layers and find solutions. The issue is there is no easy one.
Part of it is that even before the pandemic, so in February or early March, millions of people were already struggling to pay the rent.
18.7 million to be exact, according to the National Low Income Housing Coalition, with more than a third of those people spending half their income on rent each month. Then enter a pandemic that spiked unemployment to more than 14%, and it's led us to where we are now. A dire situation in desperate need of another stimulus package.
These protections that are in place now for renters are really important, but ultimately an infusion of cash from the federal government to allow whether state and local areas to continue to provide rental assistance programs that meet the level of need.
The National Low Income Housing Coalition estimates through next June, $100 billion will be needed to help people stay in their homes. Many states are providing help using leftover CARES money. A few weeks ago, Ohio approved $420 million in a second round of funds that counties would allocate based on need. Compare that to states such as Florida, which has distributed $255 million, or Arizona with $400 million left to spend. Though the numbers sound large, advocates say it will only make a dent, as it's up to the states to decide how much they want to allocate to rent.
We may end up on January 1st, 2021 with thousands of potential eviction orders.
Carrie DeJaneiro is a lawyer with the COVID-19 Eviction Defense Project. She says the CDC's eviction moratorium that was passed in September is a bandage, but not a solution. It allows court orders to happen, but stops the actual process of kicking people out of their homes. Once it expires at the end of this year, however, experts fear a mass number of evictions could take place at once.
There may be a chance to negotiate more with your landlord. For somebody that has an eviction order against them, that shouldn't stop them from saying to their landlord, I'm here, I'd like to make a repayment plan.
If there is a chance that doesn't happen, it comes down to the House and Senate, who can offer federal and state help.
Everyone is really hoping that Congress is able to get it together to pass a stimulus package that would include some housing relief.
Something that only might happen once they return from recess. I'm Dan Grossman reporting.
That's it for us, gang. As always, thanks for watching. Also, again, happy Veterans Day to all the folks who have served in the U.S. military. We'll be back tomorrow for more In the Loop. Same time, same place. Top stories from Newsy are headed your way right now.